Hello and welcome to Gaming Bolt, and today we're going to be taking a look at Sony's E3 2018 presser. In as much as we assess the company's E3 performance solely on the basis of the games they had to show, Sony completely and utterly crushed everyone else so far. While true to their word, they focused solely on 4 games, Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, The Last of Us Part 2, and Death Stranding. The 4 games they showed off were so fantastic, it's hard not to give it to them. Let's talk about those games for a bit before we get down to talking about everything else. So, the least impressive seeming of these is Ghost of Tsushima. Now, don't get me wrong, it looked absolutely gorgeous, and I'm a great fan of the art, aesthetic, and setting, but the gameplay is not the best. Animations look absolutely stiff and at odds with the animation and mobility you apparently get, while combat reminds me of Assassin's Creed, in that it's stiff and jerky and doesn't seem to be fluid or cinematic. No, of the 4 games Sony chose to focus on, Ghost of Tsushima was definitely the most underwhelming, though it still looks good enough. The other 3 games, thankfully, looked incredible. For instance, Spider-Man looks bonkers. That's the only word I can use to describe it. Effortlessly fluid with great combat that seems to blend Batman and Yakuza, as well as a lot of mobility options and loads of great references to the comics, including what seems to be the full gamut of his rogues gallery. Seriously, the sheer fluidity of the game has to be seen to be believed, and I have no doubt this will become another high-scoring addition to the PS4's exclusives library when it launches this September. The Last of Us Part 2 is what Sony chose to open with, and it looked absolutely great. The story seems to be focusing on Ellie as the protagonist, and the game itself looks gorgeous. It might be the best looking console game of all time at the very least. The best part is that there is only a minimalist HUD distracting you from how great it looks. As for what it plays like, well, there wasn't much of a revelation there. It still plays like The Last of Us, which is a good thing, by the way. It seems like Naughty Dog is basically trying not to rock the boat and not mess up the winning formula that the original game was, which we think is the best thing to do given that the original game is one of the greatest games ever made. Then there is Death Stranding. I have to admit, even now after we were shown some gameplay footage, I don't quite know what the game is. I gather it's third person and open world, but the actual game mechanics are still unknown to me. What is now exceptionally clear, however, is that Kojima has gone full horror game with this title. Maybe the horror game that he never got to make with Silent Hills is manifesting itself here in some form. The thing is, it looks fantastic. Exceptionally disturbing and horrifying in the best kind of way, psychologically distressing, and it looks like we're finally about to see what Kojima's untethered genius may look like. So yes, 4 fantastic games. Truly, these showcases represent the best game showings at E3 so far. They blow everything right out of the water, and they were very largely focused on showing us the gameplay, which I appreciate so much. But they were almost let down by just how poorly thought out everything else was. For instance, the format. Who thought it was a good idea? The show started with a musical number, which, okay, that seems to be a thing this E3. Sony, Ubisoft, Bethesda have all done it. Then we got the fantastic demo for The Last of Us. Do you know what happened then? We had a break. A 10-minute long break of 3 presenters, awkwardly talking and showing us trailers for Call of Duty and Destiny 2, as we waited for everyone in the audience to move to a different venue where the rest of the show was held. Why? Why do this? What was the point? It was sort of cool that the first venue looked like the location in the Last of Us Part 2 trailer, but was that worth it? Really? And after that, it was better, but not really? The pacing was still all over the place. We're speaking of trailers randomly being dropped with no preamble, and even the other big 3 games Sony wanted to show didn't get any introduction. They were just dropped onto the screen and then we moved on without lingering on them at all. It was basically a collection of trailers, and while that's fine, the pacing was utterly off as a result, especially because of how awful the first part was. Perhaps the biggest sin here is no release dates. You would have thought that with Sony choosing to focus on only 4 games, they would have actual updates to share. Seeing gameplay footage for those games was great, but that's it. Short of Spider-Man's release date, which we already knew, we didn't get any update for Death Stranding, The Last of Us 2, and Ghost of Tsushima. Which begs the question, if they had no release date updates for these games, because they're too far off, why not bring other first-party games to the conference which are closer? Why didn't they show off Dreams or Days Gone at the show? If nothing else, the Days Gone release date announcement could have been an actual update on a major upcoming exclusive. Even the third-party games, there were some including an announcement for Nioh 2 as well as for Remedy's new game Control, both of these look fine by the way, and of course the long-awaited Resident Evil 2 remake announcement. but except for Resident Evil, none of that got any release dates. Resident Evil 2 is going to be out in January thanks to Capcom's ongoing streak of one game a year every year in that window, but we don't know when we can expect those other games. And while that's not under Sony's control, well, it is, they decide what games to show at their presser, their own games are. They chose to focus on 4 games, 3 of which don't have release dates, and then they chose not to share any release updates. If those games don't have release windows for now, why focus on just them? Why not show us more of Dreams or Days Gone? Are these 4 games, plus the 2 I named, all that Sony has for the remainder of the PS4's life? Microsoft showed great progress with how they structure their shows this year and had a pitch-perfect show with great pacing. What ultimately held them back in my eyes was that they didn't have any major announcements to win me over just yet, though they have started to work on their future prospects. On the other hand, Sony, they had 4 of the best games we've seen so far, but they couldn't be bothered with even sharing release years, and they wrapped it all up in a poorly paced show with a horrible format that was absolutely inexplicable. That'll be it for this video. If you like what we're doing, please go ahead and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.